If you've ever had a bad direction in a joystick before, you might be tempted to replace the joystick altogether. However, you can replace the broken switch at a fraction of the cost. We will need a few additional tools, and soldering will be required. So, first things first, let's get our soldering irons out. We'll also need something to desolder with, so I have my desoldering pump. Naturally, you'll need a little bit of solder to do this as well. Something to open your arcade stick with, in this case just a regular old TE Allen wrench. And last, a small pen to make some marks. I use a Sharpie paint pen. First things first, all we gotta do is open up the joystick. Normal stuff, just unscrew all the Allen bolts. And sometimes the time to replace the switch isn't necessarily right when it breaks and completely doesn't work. Sometimes you might just notice that one of your directions is a little bit off and sometimes doesn't always work. The most common direction to go first is probably the down direction, because if you think about it, how many quarter circle forwards, quarter circle backs, super jumps, dragon punches, blocking low, these all require the down direction. And while left and right are usually mixed about depending on which way your character is facing, the down direction is always used no matter what direction. And the up direction, well, it goes without saying that you usually don't always jump in. Honestly, I just had a friend who had a little bit of trouble with super jumps coming out, and upon further inspection, the switch would actuate a little bit lower than the rest of the directions. You don't have to worry about the technical mumbo jumbo, just basically, it was a little tough to hit down. After we open it up, it's time to replace the switch. Once it's open, I like to use my marker on this harness because Mad Catz harnesses can actually be plugged in upside down, and in that case, if you plug it in upside down, only the down direction will work. And because sometimes it can be a little bit confusing which switch you want to switch out, all I do is hold down on the joystick and then flip it over and see that this, where the actuator is hitting, is the down switch. With this bit of information, I'm ready to remove the restrictor gate, which you do by just popping in these 4 black tabs that hold in the gate, and then slowly lifting it up like so. And once it's off, I just move the actuator back to that down position that we saw before, press the switch, and seeing this switch is being pressed, I mark it so I know which one I need to remove. At this point, you can just remove the TPMA switch PCB, pull out the harness, and remember which way the pins were facing. See, the pins are facing to the left here. This will be important when we reinstall the PCB. Now we're ready to focus on the switch PCB itself. We're only going to have to desolder from 2 points, and to do this, we're going to use a desoldering pump. Now there are other tools that'll do this, but I like the pump because you just push a button and it sucks solder away. Sometimes you'll push out a little bit of the old solder like that, but in my opinion, it's a little bit better to use with bigger points of solder than copper desoldering braid. So, after noting which 2 points I'm going to desolder, we just heat up the solder that's already there for a little bit and then suck away at it. It might not all come off at once. In this case it didn't, so we're just going to have to do it again on the other side to get rid of all that solder. So, just heat it up again, wait for a little bit. When you see it start to smoke, it's ready to be sucked off. There's just a little bit of solder left, and I just kind of wiped that off with my iron. It's no big deal, the only thing that's really holding it in now is the other point. So, let's get to it. Same process as before, but this time I let it heat up just a little bit more than last time, and you'll see it in the results, because this time I'm able to suck it all away in one go. There's just a little tiny piece of solder holding it in, and I just manipulate my iron to get it off, and off comes the switch. mostly because it's human nature to clicky clicky on the clicky clicky switches. I gotta click it a few times, and then bring in the new switch, clicky clicky a few times there, just to note the difference in the springiness of the switch. So now we just turn it over, thread it through the two holes in the PCB, and then turn it over and let it sit down. Now I'm going to give it a little bit of an adjustment because I want these as centered as possible. If the two prongs aren't as centered as possible in the holes, the switch might just be a little bit off, and it might be just that little bit of annoyance when you're going to press the down direction. Happily satisfied, I pull out my solder and get ready to solder. Now try not to move the switch at all while you're soldering too, because that can easily happen. However, these are very big points, so even newbie solderers can get their hands in on this project without much worry of messing anything up. With one point down, just one point to go, and this time it should be held in place pretty well, but we still need to electrically connect it, and after that, the switch has now been replaced and is ready to go. Now we're ready to replace the switch PCB, and you have to remember which direction the pins were because this will fit in any of the four directions. I pointed out that it was to the left, so we need to put it in pointing the left. The restrictor gate is really easy to just pop on. It takes only a second to do, like so. Now, with the harness marked, you just plug it right back in the direction that it was. The original Sanwa JLF harnesses actually have hooks on them, so you can't get them backwards, but the Mad Catz one doesn't have this, so that's why we need to mark it. After we seal it all back up, our joystick has now been repaired at a fraction of the cost of replacing it with a new one.